from the New Amplified Version of Paul's second letter to Timothy. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity or cowardice or fear, but he has given us a spirit of power and love and of sound judgment and personal discipline. That is, abilities that result in a calm, well-balanced mind and self-control. And from our gospel lesson today, from the Gospel of John, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. Beloved, we are in unprecedented times and some uncharted waters. As of Wednesday, March 11th, 2020, after several months of universal speculation and suspicion, the World Health Organization officially announced that we are facing a pandemic with the global spread of COVID-19, better known as the coronavirus. With reports of the virus now having spread to nearly every part of the globe, Herculean efforts are being taken by the majority of countries and communities on relatively all continents of the world to test, treat, and slow, and ultimately to stop the spread of the virus that is having unprecedented impact in truth on the lives of all of us. And on Friday, March 13th, 2020, the President of the United States declared a national state of emergency to deal with this public health crisis. Amid major and massive closures and cancellations, from schools to sports to theaters to conferences to business meetings to churches and other venues, the faith community is neither exempt or immune to the varied reactions we witness to COVID-19. In fact, many look to faith communities for leadership, guidance, support, and literally live faith as signs of hope and encouragement for others. And so, beloved, there are existential questions that must be asked of the gathered faithful of God, the community of believers, the church. So how do we as faith communities, amid our own personal needs to respond to and care for our families as well as ourselves, evidence our faith in God while hearing and heeding the research-based and professional protocols and guidelines mass distributed for the benefit of us all? There are existential questions that we must ask. How do we, with discernment, decipher through the plethora of information being disseminated about the virus to share with our congregations data that is factual from that which is solely based on ignorance, that which is based on fear-mongering, and in some unfortunate instances, the mean-spirited intention of being misleading. There are questions that we must ask in this day and time. How do we actualize our faith? How do we actualize our faith as a source and means of help to others to directly address the virus without spiritualizing our faith to the point that it becomes a source and means of actual harm by indirectly avoiding the virus, i.e., just pray and trust God? There are questions that as a faith community we must ask ourselves. How do we even use prayer to wisely make decisions for the benefit of those in our charge and care? Imperative decisions about when to meet at church, as well as when it is just too risky to do so. And other social media options must be implemented in that case. There are questions that we have to ask. And once decisions are made not to congregate in church, how will we attend to the social, psychological, as well as spiritual needs of our congregants and communities? How will we attend to them? How will we attend to them in the absence of the major historical, theological, and ontological roles that our churches have played as sources of soul-watering and soul-nurturing intercessors against the vicissitudes of life along this plane and the vicissitudes of the pain and isolation that too often accompany our experience of this life? Today, beloved, we embrace seriously the critical role and likewise the critical responsibility those of us in the faith community, and in our context, specifically the African American faith community, have to faithfully, not foolishly, serve and support our congregants, constituencies, and communities to maneuver through all challenges affecting both our collective and holistic health and well-being, and most especially in times like these. We know that here in this country alone, our survival through the most hideous and inhumane treatment imaginable has only been possible because of the audacious declaration and stand by our ancestors of faith for who we are in spirit and in truth, as God created, God sustained, and God loved people. We know well by irrefutable history that what happens in times like these is that our plight, as well as our fight against the outbreak of disease and disaster, tends to be far worse because of institutional racism, historically and pervasively embedded in every aspect of our lives, resulting in injustices and inequities that position us as social, political, and economic outliers, intentionally preventing us from receiving the best information as well as the best treatments needed for our care. Even in this moment, we recognize the fact that our people face pandemics and states of emergencies every single day as we negotiate the realities of life in America, which have not garnered the same collective support of declaration of national emergency, although the data suggests that significant morbidity and mortality is attendant to food insecurity and homelessness and inability to access health care and violence. We understand pandemics. And for these reasons, beloved, and many others, we are compelled to honor the call, command, charge, commitment, and caring we have to act in faith, not fear, coupled with sound judgment to address this global pandemic that is amongst us all. Just as the Apostle Paul wrote an encouraging and supportive letter to Timothy during times of challenge to remind him that in the midst of all, God did not give him or us a spirit of timidity or cowardice or fear, but God has given us a spirit of power and love and of sound judgment and personal discipline, that is, abilities that result in a calm, well-balanced mind and self-control. We remind us today, in times like these, of the same. It is for this reason, beloved, that our bishop has determined that we as a diocese must suspend public worship. Bishop Lee says, and I quote, "As Christians, we have a clear responsibility to help slow the spread of the disease so that the healthcare system does not become too overwhelmed to care for the most vulnerable among us. This year," he says, "I believe, is among our most pressing Lenten disciplines." So, beloved, as we convene this last time, perhaps for some weeks, I would like to share with you some ways we might remain church, even in this time of suspended public worship. Aaron Wathen wrote an article, which I've shared on social media, entitled 5 Ways to Be Church When Church is Canceled. And I want to share with you some of Aaron's insights into this matter that may be helpful to us in the coming days and weeks ahead. This seems counterintuitive in a time when people are anxious and need community, when people are facing economic uncertainty and need support, and when people are fearful and need the comfort of prayer and connection. And yet, we have to acknowledge that large gatherings are a hotspot for the spread of disease. For all of our best efforts to eliminate handshaking and peace passing and to modify communion practices, as you see on our purple page of instructions this morning, the best way to protect folks right now is to keep them apart. So-called social distancing. It's sad, it's painful, it goes against every impulse of church leaders who proclaim faith in a God who is bigger than human fear. And it rubs up against the ego of those of us who think of ourselves as strong enough, as hardy enough to weather any storm. But sometimes, beloved, painful as it is, canceling is the responsible, compassionate thing to do. And anything else is just pride. Think of this illness as the black ice of liability. Amen. If there's a blizzard, you might be able to get to church, but if you can't clear the sidewalks and the parking lots, do you really want to invite people into a hazard situation? The invisible threat that is just under the surface. And this is like that. Sure, folks who are not sick are going to feel like they should still come to church, but they could be carrying something they don't know that they have yet and pass it on to their elderly or immunocompromised neighbor. So here are some things to remember and some ways to help to keep being the church even when you can't be in the church building. Because the truth is, the church is not the building. The church is each one of us. Number 1, support your leaders, support your pastor, support your bishop, and vestry, and board members. Whoever has to make the really hard decisions about whether and how to gather in times of uncertainty. There's no roadmap for this, and there is no one right answer. Trust the folks who ultimately make the call. Spend some time in prayer, discernment, and had very difficult conversations. Know that they heavily weighed consequences, including yours and my disappointment, and ultimately did what they thought was the best thing for the well-being of the community. Amen. Thank them for having your best interests at heart. And then number 2, send in your pledge. Amen. Amen. Is this mic on? I want to be clear. Send in your pledge. Amen. This may seem like a small thing in the grand scheme right now, but trust me, it matters that you continue to get your offering in as long as you are fiscally able. This is a great time to re-examine online giving options. We have PayPal and Givelify, and you can send a check directly to your bank, from your bank. Encourage folks to sign up for automatic withdrawal. Even the healthiest congregations can find themselves in the hole and quick after just a few Sundays of missed offerings. If you can give online, if you can't do that, if you can't give online, mail in a check, send a carrier pigeon. Do whatever you have to do. Even if the building is empty, bills and salaries need to be paid. What's more, you are helping your church maintain mission commitments to the community, to the diocese, in a time when the commitment is more important than ever. Number 3, check on your neighbors. Your older neighbors, your neighbor on chemo, your neighbor whose kid relies on free school lunch, your neighbor who still has to go to work and could use help with child care. Anytime you help someone in your proximity, you are living out the values of your faith community. You are embodying what the whole gospel thing is all about, which takes the church out of the building and brings it to life for folks outside. This is what we go to church to learn how to do. It is for such a time as this that you have spent all these Sundays in worship. Number 4, pray for your church family. And send notes. Make phone calls. All the things that we do for shut-ins, do for each other now, that we all are shut-in, so to speak. We are one body, even when that body is not together in the flesh. There are plenty of ways to stay connected in spirit and care for each other's spiritual needs. Number 5, practice Sabbath. For some, this shutdown of life as we know it is going to cause significant economic hardship. And then the spirit of number 3, care for your neighbor. Care for them as best you can. In the meantime, recognize if your own discomfort is just inconvenience and keep that perspective. Recognize that downtime can be a gift. An imposed Sabbath of time to sit still and be with your family without the usual rush of places to be and things to accomplish. Read together, prepare meals together, binge watch some Netflix together. When's the last time everybody was home for this long? Talk about what you can learn from this season. Talk about your blessings. Play a game. Make something. Listen to music. It really doesn't matter. Any of these things can be worshipful in their own way. If by worship we mean rest and renewal by way of connecting with God and connecting with others. And so, beloved, we will do so. We will do so totally confident that in our faithfulness and personal discipline, the God who has seen us through and kept us through one life-threatening crisis after another, the God who has kept us through lynchings and mass incarceration, the God who has kept us through immoral and egregious enslavement of our ancestors, through Jim Crow and disenfranchisement, this same God will see us through COVID-19. The Jesus, the living water as described in our gospel today, who declared to the woman at the well that God is spirit and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. This same Jesus challenges us today to worship during this hiatus in unconventional and new ways, not just with our lips, but with our lives. Let us continue our worship, beloved, beyond this day, outside these doors, even as we must be apart. Amen.